Well, I'll go through that in my presentation, but yeah, I graduated in '05 at Cal State Fullerton, and happy to be asked to come back and talk to you all. And let's dive in. So let me share my screen. All right. So, yep, I'm Shane Mulholland. I work in feature animation right now. I went to Cal State Fullerton in the early 2000s, graduated in '05. Let's start with, what are we doing here? I asked myself that, and I I say that to kind of break the ice for myself, because I don't generally like being the center of attention. I don't like public speaking. But when I was asked if I would be willing to do this, I thought about it, and I thought about myself when I was in college, and the fact that production management wasn't talked about a whole lot. And I thought, if I could come and speak and share my experience and talk about my journey, and if it could encourage or help others, current students in their journey, then sure. All right, I'll take the nervousness and the, and come talk to you all. So that's kind of my way of just trying to be a little vulnerable and say, you know what, I'm want to do my best here. I want to share with you guys. Sorry, my hair is, this is my COVID due. I've not cut my hair in a while, so this is somewhat new to me. Usually I have a hat on, but I'm trying to look somewhat presentable. All right, so this is a quick outline of what we're going to cover. I want to, this is a kind of introduction, background on who I am, kind of where I've been, what led me to Cal State Fullerton, a little bit about my time at Cal State Fullerton. The bulk of the time will probably be a little bit of an outline of my career, and kind of the path that I've taken, the choices that I've made, and I'll talk about details, along the way. Then I'd like to share with you guys a little bit about just production management in general, my experience with it, some just sort of general thoughts, some tips, some insight based on my experience to hopefully help you if you're interested, or things that you could take with you. And I would say, even if you're not interested in production management, if you want to be a board artist, an animator, any of those things in the pipeline, hopefully there's something here that helps you understand the production team that you're working with, and what the folks on the other side are doing. And then at the end, I'm just going to try to think of some resources that I could share with you guys that I found helpful, some tips that you guys can use after that. And then we'll go into a Q&A and we can discuss. So yeah, I also wanted to say up front, so I have my notes here. I'm going to try really hard not to just look down and read from them. So I just wanted to say that, all of this to say is I'm still a work in progress. It's interesting talking about my career and my journey, because I still feel very young in my career, and I still have aspirations that I haven't achieved that I'm reaching for. So this is sort of my journey thus far, I guess. And I also kind of wanted to say that my journey, in talking about it, hopefully what you can get from it is some of my thought process along the way and what kind of led me through these jobs. But it's not something that is a path that it can be replicated. Even myself, like I don't know if I could replicate it if I tried, right? Hopefully the idea is that there's something you can take away from me sort of walking through the decisions I've made and the things that I've kind of done along the way. And I just wanted to end that with, I'm really grateful for the opportunities I've had thus far. It's been a roller coaster. There's highs, there's lows. It's thrilling, and I feel very fortunate to have had the experiences that I have, and the current job that I have. So I just want to take a beat and say that. So who am I? I am Shane Mulholland. I am a father. I'm a husband. Sorry, I was looking down at my notes. So the reason I wanted to start with that is, I'm working at trying really hard not to define myself by my career. I think it's an easy trap to fall into, and I don't want that for myself, because we are more than our jobs, right? We are more than the things that we do. It's a huge part of me, and so I don't want to downplay it too much. I'm in this job because I'm passionate about animation. So I don't want to dismiss that, but I'm working really hard to kind of see myself outside of that and stay healthy, and not be so focused on work. Because the thing is, that work is great, but sometimes it's not stable and sometimes it's not there. And so hopefully you have, whether it's your immediate family, you know, your partner, your own kids, your friends, whatever community that you have, hopefully you're building an identity for yourself outside of work. That includes work, but that is not just work. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm, you know, this is a picture from, I think, a couple of years ago when I was in New Zealand working at Weta. I have 4 wonderful kids. I met my wife in high school. And we dated through college while I was at CSUF. Yeah, I'm grateful to share my life with her. So that's a little bit about who I am. And then I wanted to, from there, just talk about my journey to Cal State Fullerton. So I'm California born and raised. I was born in Southern California, but I was raised in a little town in Central California called Bakersfield. I bring that up because I think it shaped me in ways that I didn't quite understand at the time, that I'm just now starting to understand. It's an interesting place. I'm grateful for my childhood. I had good parents who supported me. But it was a town that I never felt like I wanted to stay in. You know, its primary industries are in the oil fields and agriculture. And, you know, it's great that people can live there and make lives there. And I'm grateful that my dad was able to do that. And so I don't want to diminish that. But for me personally, I never saw a future for myself there. I was always dreaming and looking over the hill, I would say. We would make trips to LA frequently. And I think that shaped quite a bit of where I headed. I think the other thing too about growing up in Bakersfield is even just from the geography of the place, the climate sort of forced some things in my life growing up that you know, it's the winters are freezing and there's fog, so we get fog delays, and the summers are scorching hot, you know, incredibly hot, 110 at times, 110 plus. And what that meant though is, with those things, I spent plenty of time playing out in the street and with friends and that sort of thing. But when it would get so hot, you would go indoors. And so I spent a lot of time indoors with movies and games and my imagination. And I think, you know, in the winter we had fog delays, which is a funny thing to talk about because it was very unique to the Bakersfield, I think, because I've mentioned it in other places. And I have friends that grew up back east and they had snow delays and that sort of thing. But the fog would get so thick that they buses couldn't pick up the kids, and so they delay the start of school. So that was extra free time that I had, that I was, again, at home with my imagination and movies and these sort of things. And I think that those sort of things kind of helped shape me. And then, you know, I talked about kind of going over the hill. When I was in 6th grade, my parents took me on a trip to Universal Studios. So I picked this picture specifically because this is what it looked like back in when I went, with, you know, these attractions and this sort of, you know, very retro now look to it. But that trip really sparked my imagination. It's a theme park, but there's a lot of what they do there in talking about filmmaking that really just like struck a chord with me. I was fascinated. I couldn't get enough of it. You know, they had the tram where they talked about, you know, filming on there. They had a special effects, like a stunt show. And to be honest, one of the first things I wanted to do when I wanted to enter a film was I wanted to be a stuntman, right? Like I saw these guys doing those stunt shows and I was like, as a little boy, I was like, I want to do that. I want to break glasses over people's heads and blow things up. And you know, so that was what first caught my attention, but I never really let go of my interest in it and exploring. And I think, so that was sort of the part of the big seed that planted in me that, like, people do this for a job, right? And maybe this is something I want to do. There's another little bit, there's a show called Movie Magic. And so growing up, I think it was on Discovery or something like that. I don't remember it, but that was the one show I insisted on trying to watch. It was before on-demand content and DVRs and all that other stuff. And so it was on its specific time slot. And I insisted that I want to watch the show. And this show was really interesting because it dove into, it was about special effects in general. And I think it sort of shifted my interest in filmmaking towards special effects. And the more I learned about special effects, the more I learned it was related to animation specifically. And that's what really grew my passion for animation, because I really dug into, and I was really fascinated by the opportunities that it created, and the horizon, the sort of endless horizon that, you can, I think it's Walt Disney says something like, animation can achieve whatever the mind of man can imagine, or, I'm butchering the quote, but it was something like that. And like, that's really what I felt about animation. I put this magazine up here too, because growing up in the 90s, we didn't get even like AOL or the internet into our home until like late high school. So I didn't have, the easy access to all of this stuff that we have now. And I picked up this Cinefex magazine at a bookstore in the mall, and I just poured over it, reading about, what they were doing and how these things were made. Like, that was my only like access and sort of lifeline to the industry and learning and that sort of thing. So I think this combination of things really planted a seed in me that pushed me towards wanting to do this. As I looked, was getting later in high school, was looking into wanting to make it a career, I knew that it was something I wanted to do. I didn't know how to get there. And so I started actually at Bakersfield College as a junior college. And they had a computer graphics arts program. It was not related to film at all. It was more design, but I thought, you know what, there's computers, there's art, there's something I can take from this hopefully with me, when I figure out where it is that I need to go. So I went to Bakersfield College, and during that time, I was on the lookout for where do I go to really take this further, and I looked all over at different universities, different private, institutions, that sort of thing. I took a trip. My parents took me to Vancouver to look at a film school. It didn't quite feel right for various reasons. I ended up hearing about Cal State Fullerton, and I applied, and I got accepted into Cal State Fullerton. It's a public, institution that has an animation program. I could afford it. And so I applied and I got accepted. So it was really thrilling for me to get accepted and to move from Bakersfield down to Fullerton. So yeah, that's kind of the start of my Fullerton journey that I was going to kind of talk to you guys about. I was looking through pictures to share with you guys. We were talking a little bit about being Star Wars nerds. I'm absolutely a Star Wars nerd. This is me in college. I think we were possibly on our way to see Revenge of the Sith or something like that at my friend's house. So I thought I'd just share that with you, that like I'm probably, I don't know what animation students are like today, but back then we were super nerdy, and I'm super nerdy, and that's me back then.
We're still the same. Look at Madison.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. So yeah, so again, jumping back into the school part of it. So I had to pay to put myself through school as well. And so I worked at I almost said Cal State Disney. I worked at Disneyland. I say Cal State Disney because that was kind of a joke that so many students that worked at Disneyland went to Cal State Fullerton. But yeah, I worked in the parks, full-time, part-time. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was enough to pay me to get through school. And I'm grateful for that. I was grateful I was able to not sink myself into a ton of debt and get this education and work at the same time. And it forced a work ethic in me to, because I was paying for my tuition, it was important to me that I get the most out of it, and that I stay engaged, and that I maximize that investment that I was making. Just in continuing to talk about school, I've met some wonderful lifelong friends at Cal State Fullerton. And I think it's important, not just in my life, but also I think it's relevant to you all as you have your peers. You're going to find that you run into and cross paths with people continually. It's a small industry. And so anyways, this is my friend Frankie that I met there at school. We've stayed super close to this day. He's one of my best friends. He's a board artist, so he also works in animation. He lives up in Vancouver, and I'm grateful that not only did I get that wonderful education and sort of set me down my path, I also had some lifelong friends I met there as well. I found this picture and I just wanted to throw it in here because this was my desk in the early 2000s with this gigantic iMac computer with, we didn't have MP3 players and, iPhones and stuff. So I have my stack of soundtracks that I listened to when I was working and that sort of thing. And I just thought it'd be funny to share, to give you guys some insight on how much things have changed, right? We have iPads and we have our phones and all this stuff now, which are great. There's great opportunities and stuff, but it was a different world back then. It was a different time. Speaking of it being a different world, when I was there, it was an interesting time in the animation industry in general. Disney was sort of in this, had a bit of an identity crisis, and they were shutting down their 2D, the 2D work. They thought that DreamWorks was taking off. Pixar was doing extremely well, and I think Ice Age had come out and done really well, and it was the first sort of like non-Disney studio that had sort of competed with them on their level, and there was this impression that animation was going to be CG from then on, and in some ways that is the case, but 2D didn't die. And so when I was at Cal State Fullerton, we were studying 2D animation and also CG animation. And I remember just anecdotally, like, given that sort of change in the industry, like at one point Disney brought a truck and delivered all their 2D desks. Like they didn't want them anymore. They pulled a truck up and they opened the back of it to the students and they said, take them. I really regret not taking them because they are extremely valuable. They're incredible. They're beautiful pieces of furniture. But I ended up not taking one. But that was the state of the industry. So it was a little scary, to be honest, being an animation student and having the industry sort of in flux in that way. But I pressed on. So there's two things I wanted to share about Cal State Fullerton in particular that I feel like helped set me along my path. I don't know if you guys do this anymore, but we had this thing called the Acme Network. Do you guys have that? They don't. Okay. So this thing, it's funny because we're communicating here over virtual conference or video conference or that sort of thing. It wasn't as common and widespread back then. And so the school had built this room and they participated in the Acme Network. And what it was the universities, different universities would participate in this, and then the studios would participate in it as well. And there would be someone that worked at the studio that would basically put out an assignment across all of the universities. And that we would meet every week, every other week. I don't remember exactly what the cadence was. And we'd work on these assignments that professionals in the industry had given us. And we'd present them to these professionals and they would critique them and give us feedback. And we'd go iterate on them and bring them back. These pictures that I found in particular are actually of one that we were doing with Pixar. I ended up taking this assignment because it was Pixar, but it's interesting that it was specifically about layout. I was in school, I was passionate about animation in the field, but I didn't necessarily know I didn't necessarily want to be an animator. I didn't know what piece of it and where I fit in, right? What do I do? Where do I focus? This particular assignment in the Acme Network really set me on a path. And that was, sorry. So this was about layout in particular. So I dove into it and I really got excited about the mechanics of layout, cinematography, like those sort of things. It really sparked further interest in me. So layout was where I decided to sort of invest my time and energy. And it was because of this program that we had. So I'm grateful for that. Even though I didn't end up in layout, it's so intertwined with where I'm at. And I'll talk through that when I talk through some of my career stuff, that I'm grateful for it. And I think I'm better for it, having embraced it in the way that I had. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was SIGGRAPH. I think their SIGGRAPH is still going on, but at the time it was a big deal, and I would go to as many of them as I could. They weren't always in Southern California. I think they're more frequently in California now, but there was a couple years where it was in LA, it was in San Diego, it was in Vancouver, and then it came back to LA. And so I went to every one of those that I could. I think that helped me as well in terms of networking. Walking up to some of those booths and talking to people as a student. They were generous with their time. And just staying inspired about the industry itself was really exciting. So I think those two things really helped set me on a path that I'm still on today, but like just a path for success. So here I am at graduation. I picked this picture in particular because the four of us here, our squad or whatever, these are the people I spent the most time with at school. And the truth is, I still talk to these people today. And so I just wanted to say that to encourage you all to invest in those friendships, and keep that going, because those relationships are important, not just as friendships. I value these people as friends, but also, each one of these people in various ways, I've either worked with or talked about work specifically with or interviewed with. My friend Jen runs Titmouse in Vancouver, like she runs the studio. My friend Jack here works at Lucasfilm on all the Disney Plus programs that were just announced like a week ago. There's myself, I'm at Netflix Animation, and my friend Frankie is a storyboard artist, and that was 15 years ago. This picture was taken 15 years ago, and we still talk, and maybe not as frequently, but when we do, like, there's a history there, and those relationships are valuable, and I value them. And then sort of this is going to kind of bleed into my career, the career part of this. But my final semester at Cal State Fullerton, I got it actually wasn't an internship; it was a job as a PA on this film called Barnyard that Nickelodeon produced. It was the job that I could get, and I took it, and I was grateful for it. It was a small studio in San Clemente, California. It was all done in-house on off-the-shelf software. I think you can tell when you see the film, it doesn't have the quality that you get at a Disney and a Pixar and that sort of thing. But, it was my first gig, and I was excited about it. I was excited to invest in it. And there were people that I met here as well that I've run back into in other ways, in other jobs down the road, So again, I wanted to emphasize to try to maintain those relationships, do what you can to not burn bridges, and to, just be the best person that you can be, because those impressions, they last and they matter. So yeah, Barnyard, I'm just going to look at my notes here real quick. So Barnyard was interesting. I started as a PA to the TDs, and then as that was, coming to a close, I actually applied to be a character filing artist, and what that was basically we did all the sims. We were using off-the-shelf software. I think it was XSI or Softimage. I don't even know if they're around anymore. So we did all the sims, and then we did all the packaging for lighting, right? So we did sort of a QC to make sure all the assets, the proper assets, we would set level of detail manually. And so that was that job. Again, I was grateful for it. I think, it was early in my career. I was very excited about it, very proud of it. But when that was coming to an end, it was like, okay, I have to apply, and I have to try to find something else. So once the show was wrapping up and I rolled off the show, I was actually met with unemployment. And so this was the first bout of unemployment for me. And I bring it up because I wanted to share with you guys and say that this is possible, and I think you all should plan for it. And I don't mean that to scare you guys, but I think, this industry, it ebbs and flows, right? And we sometimes we can catch something and it lands and it's great, and sometimes you can't. And this moment where I was unemployed, was, it was challenging. I was questioning whether I did the right thing. Like, maybe I'm not meant to do animation. I don't know why it was that I wasn't finding jobs. It's possible, you know, I was, again, early in my career, I didn't have a whole lot on my reel. My reel probably wasn't that great. I didn't know a lot of people. So it's hard, you know, knowing people and getting your reel or your resume to someone goes a long way, because, you know, there's lots of people applying for these jobs. Whatever the reason was, I wasn't getting work. And I was questioning it. And you know, my wife and I, we were married by this point. We're trying to figure out what to do. And I had gotten to the point, I had accepted that, you know what, that was my shot, right? I went through school, I did barnyard, and that was it. And maybe I'm not meant to do more. Maybe I'm meant to go back to Bakersfield and find a job in the oil fields and, you know, do something else. And so I had, after about 6 months, I had kind of made up my mind, you know, just to be done. My friend Jack, actually, that I showed you earlier, had reached out to me. He was currently at Zoic, which was a visual effects studio, and said, "Hey, they're looking for a coordinator. Would you be interested?" And at first, I just said, you know, I don't think I am. You know, I'm not sure if this is for me anymore. And my wife said, just take the interview. Just do the interview. And if you don't like it, if it doesn't work out, what's the harm? And so I said, okay, let's talk. I met with them, and I was employed I was working by the next week. It went really well. I was grateful for that. But I was doing something. I was a coordinator. I was doing something I was unfamiliar with, and this was sort of like learning on the fly. I had producers that I worked under, and it's a small studio. It didn't have a big infrastructure. It didn't have, you know, lots of training and that sort of thing. So this was sort of like training in real time. I worked on a full TV season here. I'm looking at the time. I probably could speed up a little bit. I did a full TV season here. At the end of the TV season, excuse me, they said, "Hey, we love you. You know, it's been great having you, you know, but we want you back for the next season, but we don't have work in between the seasons. So like, if you can come back in 3 months, 2 months, I forget what it was, that would be great." And of course I was like, I can't just wait around for this. But I was fortunate enough to have met one of the producers that I worked for, the visual effects producers. Her partner was a recruiter at R&H, Rhythm and Hughes. And she had put me in contact with him. I'd interviewed and I landed a job there. So my first project at Rhythm and Hughes, I shifted over there, and now I'm in feature visual effects. It's also new territory, but you know, it was a good experience. I was also working with Jackris again here. We kind of moved over here around the same time, and that was a fun experience. You know, working in visual effects. You know, it's good, but it's intense. You know, I was working long hours. I think, you know, it was challenging. There was a lot of crunch time continually. And so for as much as I loved working in film, and you know, just being a part of that process, I started to question the amount of time that I was investing in it. You know, and I was starting down this production path, right? And so I was working, I don't know, like 12, 14-hour days. I was gone, you know, I was working 12-hour days. I was living in an hour away. So it was 14 hours away from home is what it was. We had our first child by this time. And so I was not seeing my child. And we were working, at times we were working 13 days on, 1 day off. So we were working 2 days straight, 2 weeks straight at these sort of levels, you know, 12-hour days. And it was exhausting. And I wanted to move towards, I wanted a better work-life balance. So I pursued DreamWorks. And the piece that I missed in here, and I'm just going to show this slide really quick. While I was at R&H, and I was like thinking and wanting to pursue layout still, I signed up for Animation Mentor. And again, this was, you know, virtual learning and sort of virtual school in 2020 is kind of the norm now. At the time, it wasn't. It was sort of this novel thing. And I thought, well, I could work, I can support my family through my job, and I could do this in the background. And this will help move me towards that layout role that I was really interested in. while I'm doing production as well. So I started doing Animation Mentor sort of on the side. So going back to Rhythm and Hues, one of the contacts that I made at a SIGGRAPH was a DreamWorks recruiter. And I had started having a dialogue with this DreamWorks recruiter, and they were interested in having me over. And so I did my first interview with them, and it was for actually the first Kung Fu Panda, I think is what it was. But the timing was interesting because I was still in the middle of the Mummy movie that I was on at Rhythm and Hues, and they wanted to fill that position quickly. And this was a hard choice for me because DreamWorks was interested in having me, and this was my dream job. I love DreamWorks. I'm a huge fan of Steven Spielberg. Like, this is his company, right? Like, they do amazing work. But I felt like I was in this position where I was hesitant to burn a bridge with Rhythm and Hues. I wanted to. It was there's a lot stirring around in there, and I was concerned about integrity, right? And I was concerned about the look of leaving in the middle of sort of the crunch on this project, and so I actually turned down that offer, and I thought that was it. Like, that was my chance to get into DreamWorks, and I'm going to have to move in this other direction. And thankfully, that turned out not to be the case. You know, when I turned it down, I said, I'm really interested in this, but the timing is just not right. You know, and please, you know, I'd love to, you know, maybe revisit this down the road. And of course, it was the recruiter had the usual, like, great, we'll keep you in mind. We'll let you know if something comes up down the road. And I thought, you know, that was the polite way of saying, okay, that was your chance. But they actually reached out to me, to their credit, and I'm grateful for it. They reached out to me a couple months later, and the timing was a lot better. And so I interviewed, and I landed the job. And so I ended up going to DreamWorks Animation, which was exciting for me. I was at a full, you know, animation studio. I was open with them that I was working in production, that I wanted to do layout. That was my interest, and they said that's not a problem. You know, like, there's opportunities here. You can learn from people. You know, but I also understood that I was hired to do production, and I wanted to do well at that. So I was hired on to be a lighting coordinator on Monsters vs. Aliens. So I did that sort of at the tail end of that project. And then when that wrapped, I actually joined How to Train Your Dragon. This was exciting for me because I had specifically asked to work in production for the layout department. So I got to work as a coordinator on How to Train Your Dragon. That film had been through a variety of filmmakers at that time, and it was on its last iteration with Chris and Dean. And so that last year of production was hard work. It was very, but it was exhilarating because we all knew we were working on something special. You know, sometimes you know, sometimes you don't, but sometimes you know. And when we were working on this one in particular, it felt different and it felt special, and the team they were giving it their all. And it was a team that was excited about the material, and they wanted to make this the best film it could be. I wanted to pause a beat and talk about something that happened on this production in specific, because it had a really deep impact on me. So on this production, sort of like the tail end of the production, unbeknownst to myself, I was not performing at my best. We had our second child during the production of this film, and I was continuing with Animation Mentor while working full time. And I was not working to the best of my ability, I could say. And what happened here, I think I'm extremely grateful for, and I continue to think about and use it as a sort of a catalyst to treat others this way. And that is the production manager and the associate producer called me into their office, and they said, "Hey, we noticed you're not performing to your best ability here. You know, how can we help you? What is it? Are you overwhelmed?" You know, and it was incredible how something that could be so tense or frustrating or hard was not at all, because they could have easily like looked at me and made assumptions and said, he's being lazy, he's not a hard worker. It was actually the opposite. They looked at me, they saw the skill that I had, and they believed in me. And they said, we think you can perform better, and you're not. And, as we kind of talked about it in that room, it was a mixture of frustration with myself, but gratitude that these people saw this in me. They saw beyond that, and they saw the potential in me. And they were willing to sit down and have this uncomfortable conversation. And really what it came down to is I was overwhelmed. We had our second child. We were adjusting to that. I was doing school late at night with Animation Mentor. I was staying up really late at night, getting up and going to work the next day. And I sort of had lost sight of things. And I was exhausted. And so leaving that conversation, I actually took a sabbatical from Animation Mentor. I took a break. And, I told myself, one, I was grateful for them for doing that, but two, that was kind of a choice for me, right? I could either do the things I needed to do to fix it and to make, push myself further and grow, or I could sit back and just let these things happen to me and see how it all plays out. So I did. I went on a sabbatical. I sort of reinvested my energies at work, and I sent them a message, and I said, just simply thank you. Like, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. And so anyways, I wanted to share that with you all in the sense that, like, just to say that, when you're working in production, you're dealing so deeply with people, and I'll get to some of that later, but just give people the benefit of the doubt, I would say, before we jump to conclusions. So anyways, I'm going to start to build a timeline here. So I went from MVA to How to Train Your Dragon. After How to Train Your Dragon, I went on to Megamind. That was a cross-site show. So PDI was the main, PDI is, so DreamWorks had a campus up north. It was called PDI. And so that was the main hub for Megamind. And so I was the cross-site coordinator on this show. And I actually, given that I was still pursuing layout at this time, I got in close with the layout department, tried to glean it from them as much as I can. And then there's another little bit of a crossroads here for me. This was about the time where DreamWorks came to me and said, hey, you're doing really well at this job. We like you in this job. Would you be interested in growing and being promoted to production supervisor? And so this was another point where I had to dig deep and figure out what do I want to do? I think production, was sort of seen as sort of a fallback. And I hadn't been super serious about it. And so I said, I still want to I want to give layout a try, and I want to keep at it. So thank you. And I sort of said, I'm going to stick with where I'm at right now and try to keep working at it. So that was Megamind. So again, trying to build this timeline here for you guys. From the end of Megamind, I went on to this Gift of the Night Fury. And so this was another sort of, and there's more time, obviously. There's about a year like that's lapsing in between this stuff, but this was another decision point for me. So when I got on, this was a smaller crew. It was a TV special. The leadership on the show, they're very special people, and they knew I was interested in layout. So I was the production person for the layout department on this show. And the layout, the head of layout knew I was interested. So he had given me some work to do on the side to help me grow. And so this is where I realized it was a sort of a fork in the road. I was either going to have to invest a lot more time outside of my work hours, because those were my obligations. That's what they had hired me for, to really break through and push into this layout role. Or do I turn and I embrace production? And the kind of conversation I had in my head really came down to, they like me in this role. They seem to think I'm doing really, really well in this role. And I like this role. I kept pushing myself towards this layout thing because I felt like that's what I needed to do. But I hadn't really stopped and thought about production as a career for myself. And so this was the point at which I said, okay, I'm going to set this sort of dream goal with layout aside, and I'm going to pursue production. So I went back to the studio and said, hey, production is something I want to do. I'm committed to it. And when the time is right, I would like to be promoted, and I would like the opportunity to start down that path. And I'm grateful that, again, this was a great place. And I don't want to get too sort of mushy about it. DreamWorks is a special place for me because I learned and I grew a lot here. And I worked with some wonderful people that were extremely patient with me, like as I was working through this stuff. So I was on we called it How to Hatch Your Dragon was what we worked on it under, but it came out as Gift of the Night Fury. From that, I got a job on How to Train Your Dragon 2. I was very early on this project. At first, I was in the hub as a coordinator, and they promoted me very early on to a supervisor. So I got to be production supervisor. I ended up supervising modeling and matte painting on this show. I was on for almost 4 years on this project in particular. I was on really early, all the way through to the end when we shipped the film, we were doing marketing and that sort of thing. So I have a really close attachment to this film. Also during this time, so not only getting promoted, also during this time, because it was over the course of 4 years, I had 2 more kids during the production of this film. So we joked that there are dragons babies. But yeah, so I was able to be, I had the privilege of being a supervisor on this show. And then from there, after that was over, I went on to this show called Boo. My guess is you probably don't know what this is. That is because it never came out. So I worked on this film, and I can't even remember, it starts to blur a little bit, but I can't remember how long I was on it. But this was a very challenging production for a variety of reasons. One of those things is, I mentioned earlier, with How to Train Your Dragon, when you're working on something really special, there's also the opposite feeling that happens. Sometimes that like, this isn't great and it could be better. And it came down to the studio realizing that, and that's why it never came out. It was in production. It got pretty far along, to be honest with you. If you can Google it, there's some clips and stuff that have made its way online. We were in full production. We had scenes that were lit, but it was a pretty dark time once that production got shut down, because with that came the closure of PDI, and DreamWorks kind of had a bit of its own crisis. They had to let a lot of people go, and Jeffrey Katzenberg got up in front of the whole company and said, okay, like he kind of outlined it, and I don't envy him, doing that. But he said, everyone's going to have a meeting from top to bottom, from, the entry-level interns, PAs, entry-level artists, all the way up to the executives. And not everyone's going to make it. And some people are going to get let go. And so that was an interesting and very challenging week. I did not go work at the Gap, but they put me on Gap. So when I got my meeting, they called me in and they said, we really want to keep you. We think you have a future here. We just don't have work for you yet. And so they put me on what they called Gap. So what that meant was I was coming into work without work. And while that may sound nice, it's nice for about a week. But I was on Gap for about 6 months. It was hard. It was really hard to not have something that you could be investing in. And I wish the studio had been better about how this was handled. I think they were trying to figure it out on the fly. So I can only fault them so much for it. We had asked, can we do, there's all these people that are on Gap. Can we produce a short? You're already paying our salaries. Can we do something? They declined. They didn't want us to do that. They didn't give us a whole lot of guidance on what we should be doing. For my own self, looking back on it, I wish I had invested the time in training and doing more, but I was exhausted and I didn't do as much as I had hoped. So I was on Gap for about 6 months. I interviewed on multiple projects. I ended up on this project called Everest. I was really excited about it because the studio was moving towards, they had a facility that they were co-building, I guess, in Asia. And this was going to be our first co-production. And so part of my job was going to be helping build that pipeline between the two studios. It was really exciting for me to take on that job. It felt like a fresh challenge. But unfortunately, about a month into that job, they shut it down. And for various reasons, I don't feel like I can go into here, but it was heartbreaking because I was really invested in it and also the picture, and the director that was on it. This was her idea. It was her original idea that she sold to the studio. And there was, some creative differences, and she ended up getting pulled off the project, and they shut it down. And so the fairy tale ending there, I guess, is that they ended up bringing her back, and she did finish the film as Abominable, I think is what it came out as. But when they pulled the plug on that, that was the point at which I turned to the studio and I said, I can't go on Gap again. I had already started talking to other studios, and I said, I need to be on something, or I have to move on. And so they said, hey, we have something for you. We have a need on Trolls. Someone else was leaving the studio, and I came in modeling surfacing supervisor on Trolls. That was a good experience for me. But I think at that point, I feel like this was about 8 years in. I was ready to move on. I'm gonna try to cruise through the rest of this because I've been going for like 50 minutes now. So yeah, that was like this DreamWorks timeline. So I was ready for something new. I had a friend that worked in video games, and about every year he would bug me about working in video games. Are you ready to come over? Are you ready to come over? I said, no, I don't want to work in video games. I want to work in animation. Well, he had pinged me this year, and I was like, well, let's talk about it. So I ended up interviewing. I took a job at Amazon Game Studios. It was an interesting period. They had a huge appetite to get into games. I had not worked in games, but the executive producer that I interviewed with had worked in film, and she believed that I could sort of adapt my production skills into video game development. And so we moved up to Seattle, and Seattle's a beautiful place. For us, this was our first time living outside of California. Lots of, it was a great opportunity, but the game itself was a little bit of a mess for various reasons. The reason you probably haven't heard of Amazon Game Studios is they've struggled to establish sort of a foothold for themselves and really release anything that has been meaningful. So those 2 years were their own challenges. I was hired on to be the art producer, and I didn't have a full team to work with. So I was the PA, the coordinator, the production supervisor, the production manager. I was doing all of these things. I was organizing, meeting with external vendors and organizing, outsourcing. I learned a lot on this job, but it was rocky and it was hard. And I think one of my big takeaways from this, it kind of circles back to what I was talking to earlier, is not having that identity being tied up in your work, having community, your friends, your family, your partner, your spouse, your kids, whatever it is, to help you sustain you through that. Because if you can see yourself as more than just this thing that's not going well or that's hard, it can help, I think, get you through those times. So anyways, towards the end of this, I was ready to move on. The game wasn't going anywhere. And that's just putting it politely. So my wife and I started to talk about, what do we want to do? We moved out of California. We would love to see the world a little more. That's hard with a family of 6. Well, what if I worked somewhere, right? Like, what if I worked internationally? So we had some conversations. We looked at London, all the hot spots for animation and visual effects. We looked at London, we looked at Canada. Very quickly, we narrowed in on Weta Digital, and I'm grateful that that panned out. it's an amazing studio. They do amazing work, and New Zealand is an amazing country. I was the layout department manager. So again, I'm still entwined with layout. I love the work that they do, but now I'm doing it from the production side. And so it just I feel like it gives me that much more insight into what the artists are doing as a production person. So anyways, I was there for, I'm going to run through these. I was there for just under a year and a half, and I worked on, let me go back one. There was a lot that moved through that department. So I was the department manager. I had a production supervisor below me, and then two production coordinators that were kind of assigned out to. So I was responsible for looking at the big picture schedule across all of these individual schedules. And that had its own challenges, but it was exciting. And that sort of organizational part of it is what I love, right? Because I see it as a big puzzle. And it's not always easy, but it's really gratifying when you can solve that puzzle. I worked on, a lot of these productions, all of these productions as they moved through the department. The big one that was happening in the background, meanwhile, was Avatar 2. It's still in production. I can't talk about it. This was an image that Disney had released, so I put it up here. And I think that'll come out someday, but they're doing a lot there, and it looks really exciting. So that work was contract based, and after my first contract was renewed and my second one was coming up, I just kind of felt the urge and the need to kind of come back to the US and maybe get back into feature animation. So I'd put my feelers out. It's hard applying for work halfway around the world, but I put my feelers out and I was talking to people, and just kind of going back to the idea of relationships and maintaining them. There were people that I worked with at DreamWorks that found out that I was looking for work, and they had reached out to me, and they said, hey, this person that was my peer at the time that I was there before, she had got promoted into this role that was director of marketing operations. She said, Shane can do this work, but she was pregnant, and so she was going to be going on maternity leave, and they needed to have someone cover for her. So I knew it was a kind of a short-term thing, but they asked if I'd be interested in covering for her, and I said, yeah, let's do it. And so I got into marketing for a spell. It was a new company by then. They had sold to Universal. So there was different leadership at the company. And this was an interesting experience for me because I got to see a different thing, different part of the process from the marketing side than I did before. My role there was specifically as sort of a conduit between Universal and DreamWorks marketing and the productions themselves. And so I was sort of I was the one, I had an office, a desk at Universal and a desk at DreamWorks. And I would attend meetings at both. That was really exciting for me, going back to that kid that went to Universal Studios in 6th grade, because this is totally just not super important, but it was thrilling for me to drive onto that back lot and park and go into the building and work there and look out over everything. It was my role was minor. I don't want to make it bigger than it was, but it was exciting to do that. It was sort of like this wish fulfillment for a wish I didn't know I had. So anyways, I helped ship the marketing campaign for Trolls World Tour, which, as you can imagine, that came out earlier this year. The timing for that was interesting. So because I was covering for someone's maternity leave, it was never my job. It was always her job to come back to. That was understood. And I understood that. And so I was talking to the studio about what opportunities might exist after she came back. They were interested in having me, but the timelines didn't line up just right. And about that time, the pandemic sort of rearing up. We had to shift gears and ship the marketing campaign shifted from a theatrical campaign to the PVOD campaign that it ended up being. So that was interesting. But anyways, I couldn't line up work at DreamWorks. And so from there, this was my second bout of unemployment, and it was this year. So my last day of work with Universal DreamWorks was on my birthday. It's kind of random, but you know what? this was a little different for me because of the career that I had up to this point, but also given this year and everything that was going on, I, I, I didn't take it that hard, you know, like there's so many things happening in the world. There's so many people that were facing the same situation as I was. It's hard and it's sad, but in some way it made it easier, an easier sort of pill to swallow. And don't get me wrong, it's hard, you know, no one wants to be unemployed. But, you know, I did my best kind of looking back over the unemployment I had in the past and the gap that I had at DreamWorks to try to set myself up to do better. So I was trying to exercise, I was getting out and running, and I was applying for work. I was making sure I was kind of staying on top of what was happening in the industry. I was staying in touch with people, and I'm very grateful because towards the end of the summer, I among the interviews that I was having, I was interviewing with Netflix Animation, and I ended up getting, they were offered me a production manager role on an animated feature, and that's where I'm at today. So that was my journey. I didn't anticipate it taking an hour to get there, so I'll try to get through this so that we can get to the Q&A. So production management. Let me just take a drink of water real quick. Thank you. Production management, just some general thoughts based on the experiences I've had. If I had to boil everything I'm about to say down to just 4 things, bullet points, it would be this. Be kind, work hard, stay curious, and adapt. Those sort of things, those things are going to kind of intertwine between a lot of the stuff that I'm going to share with you guys. But it's really that simple. You know, it's as in leadership and as production management, your attitude and the way that you carry yourself, it's contagious. So if you are not kind, it creates a toxic environment. And if you are kind, hopefully, it's not going to magically make everyone in the department kind, but it sets this tone and it sets the stage. And so I wanted to say that working hard is equally as important. You know, I think that's one of the things that can set you apart. You know, in this day and age with so many distractions, working hard, you know, you can teach the mechanics of the job. You can't teach people to work hard. They either are going to do it or they're not. And so, you know, finding that in yourself, whatever it is, that keeps you working hard, you know, fight for it. And I would say do it. Staying curious is equally important, you know, as the industry changes and things evolve. Just, excuse me, staying on top of things, diving deeper into your role. Just as someone who, you know, animates, studies, you know, animation, you know, and dives deep into, you know, improving their craft, I think is equally important for production. You know, diving into, you know, production management, scheduling, the people part of it, you know, and I'll talk about some of those things. And then adapting kind of relates to that, but things change. You know, I talked about the industry changing when I was in school. You know, we're in a massive change right now, right? Like the studios are fighting over the theatrical window. HBO just announced their whole slate is going to HBO. I'm sorry, Warner Brothers announced their whole slate's going to HBO. Like these things, these plates are shifting underneath us, and we have to adapt. And so just not getting so stuck in your ways that the industry leaves you behind, you know. So this next one is just about production in general. This quote, it kind of seems funny on the surface. The idea here is there's only one way to eat an elephant, a bite at a time. It's kind of it's not a joke, but it's kind of a cliche thing that we talk about in production, because the work that we do with scheduling can easily get overwhelming. This is the schedule. I stripped everything out of it. But if you pull back and look at it, it can be daunting to see a schedule like this for the first time, or get asked to make a schedule when you have a whole production, you have all of the pieces, you have all the people, all the departments, and then go. You know, like it's daunting. So the idea behind that quote is The only way to do it is to just do it a piece at a time, break it down into its component parts, tackle it a piece at a time, and you'll end up getting to this thing that's incredibly complex that at the outset you couldn't just do all at once. So that's just a little tidbit about not getting overwhelmed in the details, and when things look too big and too complicated, to step back, look at the pieces, and just take it a step at a time. Let me just catch up on my notes. Talking about production work in general. So there's upsides and downsides to lots of things. I didn't want to just gloss past or not talk about the downsides because they're there, and I wanted to be open about them, and we can talk about them further, but I just wanted to share a few things with you guys. Sometimes working in production, our work by its nature is sort of like pulling the strings behind the scenes, and you can feel invisible. And it doesn't feel great, to be honest, at times. You can put a lot of work into things, and you can just get breezed by. That can be hard, and you kind of have to learn what it's going to take to deal with that and cope with that. The ability to live and work within an ambiguous environment, right? There's a lot of ambiguity sometimes with the schedule, with how, what's happening, why sometimes you don't know why the studio is making certain choices. There's mandates that kind of come down that you have to lay out with the crew, and it can be hard. And so there's not a silver bullet answer for that by its nature, right? That's part of it, because you are dealing with ambiguity, but that can be a struggle. I talked about the unemployment, and I just wanted to encourage you guys all, just be smart about it. When you are doing well and you're making money, I'm not here to give you life sort of financial advice, but I would encourage you to put some of that money away for a rainy day, that rainy day being unemployment, because it's possible it's going to happen. And I feel fortunate that my wife and I set up our finances in a way that we had an emergency fund that sort of floated us through these times. And I would encourage you to do the same, because by its nature, like, no one plans on being unemployed. So just look ahead, plan ahead, and prepare yourself for that day. And if that day never comes, that's okay. Like that money's still in the bank, whatever it is, and you'll be okay. But better to be prepared than to not. And then sometimes, part of our job is people management, and there's not always answers for what you do, and what you're dealing with. Sometimes you're paired with an HOD that is not doing well in their job. What do you do? Sometimes you have an artist who is struggling, and maybe it's not about like I was talking about with my story earlier. Maybe it's not about ambition, or maybe someone's struggling, maybe someone's drinking at work. What are you going to do then? There's not answers for all of these. I think the answers that I would have is, I would just say you're not alone when you're doing this. Usually there should be a support infrastructure at the studio that you're at that you should utilize. So much of what we do is about people, but we're not HR. And that's when things like that, if there's things that, big things like that are sort of outside of your capability to handle, you can reach out for those people in the studio that can help and partner with you to get you through those things. So yeah, I just wanted to take a beat to say that the job is not always easy, but one of the things that I love the most about this job is the people part of it. This is the layout crew on How to Train Your Dragon. I just was trying to find a picture with the crew, but the caretaker part of it is, I think, probably what draws me to production the most. I get a great amount of joy and satisfaction seeing the team that I work with succeed. Like seeing the artists excel brings me a lot of joy, and that's where I find satisfaction in my job. Like sometimes it's barriers in communication, whatever it may be, but like that's the piece of it that I really I'm repeating myself now, but it really keeps me going. There's a part of this job that you're part counselor and psychologist. Like, I don't have a psychology degree. I'm not a counselor, but a lot of times, the people that work for you, they need someone to talk to, and of course you have to maintain a professional relationship, and there's things that, there's lines you can't cross. But the beautiful thing about our job is we spend so much time with people, and a lot of times people just want to talk. They want someone to listen. And I love that. Like, I love, I do spend a lot of time with these people, and I genuinely care. I want to see them succeed. I want to see them healthy. I may not be the person that can help them through if their marriage is struggling. I'm not in a place to do that. But I know there's tools that DreamWorks may provide that can help put them on a path for that. I'm just picking something out of the air. We have a variety of struggles in our lives. And again, I can't be the one to solve all those, but if I can help point them towards some help, then great. That's good. And in terms of being the last little bit here, for this topic in particular, in terms of advice for being in production and about being sort of that caretaker part of it, is being authentic, I think, is really important, and being transparent as well. Saying, I don't know, is okay. I think there's a lot of pressure to know everything all the time. And it's not fair, and it's not true. You should not be expected to know everything all the time. And it's okay to say, you know what? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, but let me go find out. Let me go dig into this more. I think the worst thing that can happen is you try to BS an answer, and then that sort of starts to spiral. So just in that sense, I just encourage you to just be authentic and transparent and real, and level with someone. If there's a decision that the studio is making that the crew or the artists aren't on board with, you sometimes you have to be the one to relay it and say, I don't know why this decision was made. And I'm looking into it, or I'm trying to understand it, and go do that, and be the advocate for the team. But just being willing to have that vulnerability, I think it makes you, it creates a connection there that's important in the job, I would say. Stay curious. This one's hopefully self-explanatory, but again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Just staying curious about the work that we do, about the industry, trends in the industry, trends in production management in general. Keep diving in, and don't let go of that. Don't settle. Don't find a lane and then let the industry pass you by as it adapts around you. So yeah. Got through that part. So I'm going to get through the resources part. So this is just some tips, tools, and then we can get into a Q&A. I wanted to be specific on this and say that Shotgun and Excel are probably the most widely used tools in our roles right now. And I wanted to take a beat and say, learn how to use them, but don't just learn the steps. Don't just learn the buttons and the paths to do what you need to do. Really dive under the hood and understand what's happening and why you're doing what you're doing. I say that because when I entered the industry, Excel was around, but Shotgun wasn't. And I went to Rhythm and Hughes. They had so at Zoic we used Excel. At Rhythm and Hughes they had a proprietary tool, which meant there was no way you could train for it outside the studio. And then when I went to DreamWorks, when I went in, they had a proprietary tool for production tracking called Nile, which was built for Prince of Egypt and wasn't built for CG production. It was cumbersome and it was hard, but I had to adapt myself to it. I took what I learned from Job Tracker at Rhythm and Hughes, and I applied that to their tool set. And I would say, I could take that and apply it to Shotgun and to these other tools. And so that's just sort of the caveat I would say to these is don't just learn these tools themselves, learn what you're doing and why you're doing them. Stay informed about the industry. I've touched on this a little bit. I regularly read Hollywood Reporter and Variety, sort of in my sort of morning routine of checking my email and checking in on things, checking the news. I also check, I also check these two, among other things, so animation is a part of a larger industry, which is the filmmaking, right? And then that industry is part of a larger sort of society and world of business and that sort of thing. And they're all connected in various different major and minor ways. And so I think staying informed helps you both have conversations with people about the industry that you're participating in, but also understanding why things are happening around you, why studios are opening and closing, why shifts are happening. I think it's just very important just to stay on top of your chosen industry. These are a couple books. In specific, these Harvard Business Review books, I find extremely helpful. The format for these are so Harvard Business Review, I think, is a periodical, and these books collect a variety of articles on a specific topic. And what I like most about that is sometimes those things can be really dense. The topics can be hard to digest. You need time to process and think about them. How would you implement the things that you're reading here? What you're reading? How does that relate to your job specifically? And what I like about these is the ability to just kind of pick it up, read through an article, and just kind of digest it over some time before I move on to the next one. So those are really great. The Power of Habit is great in understanding habits and how we get into them, how we can break them, and how we can build them. I think is helpful. Emotional intelligence, on emotional intelligence is really good, and it's talking about this idea of there's not just sort of IQ intelligence, but there's a separate intelligence that's equally important, based around understanding your own and other people's emotions. And then I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, the Daring Greatly, talking about vulnerability, and Dare to Lead, which kind of takes some of the topics from Daring Greatly and applies them to leadership. The Harvard Business Review has an Instagram that I follow or whatever, and I think it's really helpful because there's a lot of bite-sized bits of information in here it's just great to see them, like, as you're kind of doing your social media stuff. Some of the stuff that they talk about is not necessarily intuitive, and so it's good to kind of dive into some of the details and the research behind some of these things, and management and that sort of thing in the industry. Some podcasts that you'll think of something is actually a podcast specifically around sort of business management and that sort of thing. And one of the hosts, actually, I worked with at DreamWorks, she's since gone on and she teaches production management at a university in Texas. So it's great that she's doing that, and that would be helpful. The Dear HBR is tied to the Harvard Business Review that I mentioned earlier. And then these two are both Brene Brown. She has some podcasts. The Unlocking Us one is not specifically about production. It's not even specifically about management. But I think because the job of production is so tied to people, what's really great about that is the discussions that happen around people, the variety of people. And so I find that encouraging and useful. And then just books, right? Staying inspired, staying on top of, what's happening. But I think staying on top of was more the Hollywood Reporter stuff, but staying inspired by the films and stuff, the things that kind of got you into the industry. I love having these books on my shelf to kind of pull off, when you're exhausted and you're not feeling it that day or whatever. And just to kind of remind myself, I do love this stuff. I really am into this. And like, okay, I put these ones at the top too, because I think it's important to not just get so focused in on our chosen field of animation, that to kind of find and look beyond that, right? Because that's what's going to enable you as a filmmaker, a storyteller, an animator, like whatever it is, whatever part of the process, just more about the world around us allows us to contribute more. And so, I like architecture, and in specific, I like brutalist architecture. I think it's incredible. These are some illustrators that I really like their work that's not specifically related to animation, so I just put them up there. So that's it. That was my presentation. I want to say thank you for your time in coming to listen to me. And hopefully you found something that's helpful. I think we have some time left to do some Q&A. And yes, thank you very much.
So much, Shane. It was so interesting to hear your experience going through production. Like, you've been on so many different shows, different features. It's really cool to see how it's gone like through the years.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been an incredible journey. And like I said, like I couldn't have plotted it from the outset. And like, you know, I think all of you guys are going to have your own journeys, whether they're in production or they're in animation, and they're related. And so, yeah, I would thank you.
All right, so our first question is from Angie Reyes, who is one of our PMC officers. She says, "Hey Shane, thank you so much for your great presentation. Just out of curiosity, were you a PMC officer when you attended Cal State Fullerton?"
I was in PMC. I don't think I was an officer, but I don't know if that's like documented somewhere and someone can prove me wrong. I just honestly don't remember. But I was definitely in the PMC, and I remember doing activities with them. You know, so I don't know if I was an officer though. You got me on that question.
That's fair. Thank you for. I like realized I never asked, so it was nice to see that Angie asked.
Yeah.
Keely asks, "What does a typical day look like in production?"
Typical day. I don't know if there are typical days. I say that to say, you know, some days my calendar's packed and I'm double booked multiple times an hour, you know, but just, okay, just generally. So a lot of it is, you know, starting the day. Right now it's different, right? Because I roll out of bed, I get dressed, and then I walk over to the desk. There's no commute. But you know, it's checking in on you know, you start looking at, you look at the calendar. Hopefully what I try to do, well, I can get to that at the end of the day, but the night before I try to look ahead, right? To look at what's coming up the next day. So I'm mentally prepared, you know. But you start your day, you look at your calendar, and then you know, check your email and see, you know, if there's specific things that need to be actioned. And it depends on the department you're doing, you know. I guess speaking in production management in general, some of the day is dailies within your department. You have, you know, right now I'm a production manager, so I'm actually sort of overseeing across multiple departments. So that's why I'm often double booked, because multiple departments are doing their dailies at the same time. And I try to bounce between them, or on a given production, you split it up with, you know, the associate producer takes this and you take these, that sort of thing. You sit in, kind of keep things going, trying to, you know, in those meetings themselves, you're trying to keep it on track, making sure, you know, it's sometimes sometimes the conversation will devolve and you're talking about Star Wars and all this other stuff, and it's fun, and you kind of learn to give it that space, but then there's also, okay, like, we got to get back to work here. And so just nudging the conversation back towards work, or just giving a reminder of the time, you know, we've got about 10 minutes left. Are there any notes that we need to hit, you know, that sort of thing. Sometimes there's scheduling meetings where you're meeting with across the departments, and you're looking at the big picture and the shots as they're moving through the pipeline. You're discussing any roadblocks or hangups, and you're sort of troubleshooting with the production team to resolve those, and that sort of thing. Sometimes there's one-on-ones, so you're meeting one-on-one with either artists or your production supervisors, the coordinators, people who are working below you, or you have a one-on-one with the producer. And that time, generally, unless there's a specific topic or something you're trying to deal with, that's like, you know, you have a screening coming up and you're trying to hit X, Y, and Z, and you're struggling with it, you could talk about those details. But sometimes it's just catching up and learning about, you know, what's going on in that department. How can I support you? What do you need to make sure that your department is moving, and that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm just trying to think through some of the other meetings that we have. You know, that honestly takes up a lot of the day. You know, I usually towards the end of the day, at least in my current job, every day I have a meeting with the producer that I'm working for. and we just kind of recap the day because we're not always in the same meetings. So it's a time to get in sync with each other, share some of, if there's important stuff that happened that everyone knows about, or that the two of us need to know about, we talk about that. Sometimes it's just listening to each other. Sometimes you're just exhausted and you need to or you're frustrated and you need to get something off your chest, and vice versa. Like, you can talk about those things. And then I try to end my day with, is there any last minute emails I need to send? And then looking over the day ahead, and then you do it all over again. So.
All right, thank you so much. This is just to like add on to that question. Are there days where like it's busier than others? Are there ever any slow days?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it depends on where you're at in production, right? Whether you're coming right up against a screening, sometimes there's a lull following a screening, and there's some departments that are super busy, right? Because you're collecting feedback, you're trying to document it and dissect it in a way that you can then review and distribute back out. So some of the departments, might not be busy because they're kind of waiting for feedback. It really depends on where you're at in the production. Yes, some days are busier than others. Some days are light, and you can go for a walk, and that's nice. I would say on the whole, though, if I think general production philosophy wise, though, and again, not everything's in your control, right? But if a show is being managed properly, you're not going to do a crazy amount of overtime, and the days are going to hopefully be, again, not everything's in our control. Sometimes you're given a deadline that is unfair and unrealistic, and you have to make it work. And that ends up what ends up happening. But hopefully, if you're given and you're entrusted, you're trusted with the job, and then people sort of respect your input, and you can lay things out in a reasonable way that gives the space for that ebb and flow, and people aren't putting in crazy hours. And I would say in general, when I look back at my time at DreamWorks, one of the reasons why I tried to get into it was for a better work-life balance. I definitely think I achieved that there. I talked to friends, and I think I can count maybe 5 times in 8 years that I worked on a Saturday. And in general, my day was 9 to 5, 9 to 6, and I'm grateful for that. There are days I worked a lot later, but it wasn't that often, and it was reasonable. And, you just, I forgot what the question was, by the way. So I hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I was just asking if there is off times or busy times.
Oh, right,
stuff like
right,
that. Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Right.
it definitely, I would say the bottom line is it ebbs and flows. There are days that are slower, and it's nice to get a breather, and hopefully we can make space for that. And there are days where you're full on for the whole time, and you get home and you're just tired. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that. All right. Did you ever feel like an art block or a production manager block, like a lack of inspiration? If so, how do you overcome it?
Whew. Yes. Yes. I felt that in the micro, in terms of like specific situations. Sometimes, if you're working on a schedule, or you're building out a schedule, you're trying to plan something. Sometimes there's when you're in Excel and there's a formula off somewhere, you're racking your brain trying to figure it out. It's frustrating, and you're not getting it. There's not a silver bullet answer for that one, but a lot of times, like, I'll go for a walk. Sometimes you need to step away. Sometimes you're so in the weeds that you're not going to get it unless you give yourself a break, go think about something else, and then come back to it. And then you see it right away, and you're like, oh, that was easy. How come I didn't see that before? That's kind of in the micro. In the macro, I think there are times, again, there's seasons, right? It ebbs and flows. There's times where I definitely feel more inspired, and passionate and driven. And there's other days where the hard days wear on you, and you're tired and you're frustrated, and maybe you're not inspired. That's the reality of it. How do I resolve that? Try not to take it out on other people, is the first one, because that's on you, and it's not fair to others. But sometimes there's not a clear way through it. Sometimes you put one foot in front of the other, and there's a breakthrough at some point. Sometimes you have to step back and start asking yourself, why am I feeling this way? Is there something that I'm doing? Is there something in my life that's causing this? Is it a relationship that is unresolved, and or is it work related? Is there tension at work? Is there something that I need to do to improve that, to kind of break through? And so I think there's not a one size fits all answer, but I think stepping back, giving yourself a break, giving yourself a breather and the time to think about it and reflect, I think can help quite a bit.
I see. Thank you. That's a very thoughtful answer. All right. Andrea Mulholland asks, would you ever consider moving back to New Zealand?
That's my wife, by the way. Yes, 100%. It's funny. We left New Zealand in September of 2019, and less than 6 months later, we've got this global pandemic, right? And New Zealand's probably the safest place in the world to be. So like sometimes you wonder, oh man, like had we stayed, what would be different? And again, I had an amazing experience going back to DreamWorks. Netflix is going really well right now. I'm really grateful for this job. But I would definitely consider going back. I would love to live in New Zealand again. It's a wonderful place. So there's your answer.
I would like to ask what it's like there. Like, what was the difference between working at DreamWorks and then going to New Zealand and working at a New Zealand company? Like,
yeah, that's a good question. So Weta is interesting. I think the biggest difference in terms of the work is we're working in visual effects. Usually in feature animation, you're on a specific project, right? And you're on that project for the duration. My job at Weta sort of crossed everything that was moving through the facility because there's I think at one point I remember counting there was like 12 or 16 projects that were moving through the department that I was juggling. So that's the biggest difference in terms of the work. In terms of like company culture and that sort of thing, I think DreamWorks was it was a big company with the right infrastructure and the support for the job that I was doing. Weta Digital was because of its sort of born out of its nature of being a mom and pop facility that exploded with Lord of the Rings. Like they built this little animation or sort of visual effects studio down at the southern end of the world, and to do this work. And it really was sort of a small, it grew out of a small sort of mom and pop thing. And they kept adding on work. They did Lord of the Rings. They added on other productions and stuff. And I think all the while they became this big machine, this big facility. But I think they maintained that sort of small mom and pop, personality to it. And there's upsides and downsides to that. I don't want to sound overly critical, but there is downsides from that. Like in terms of coming in and not getting a lot of training in their pipeline, right? And I was, for me specifically, I was left with this incredibly like they admitted it themselves to me when I came in that the pipeline is super dense, super frustrating. Here's some documentation. Not everyone can read documentation. It's like reading the manual for Maya, like handing someone the manual for Maya and then saying, okay, go animate. Like it's not that simple. Just because the information's in there doesn't mean, so it's just things like that. They didn't have a lot of the infrastructure that I was used to. So I would say those are some of the bigger differences. Yeah, my hair is.
Mine's getting long also.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm just not used to it. I wear a hat, and I didn't because I was trying to be presentable, but it's doing its own thing right now.
It happens. It happens. Um, Melinda asks, "What is one of the greatest lessons you've learned during your journey in production?"
Greatest lessons. I would go back to that one I talked about it at with How to Train Your Dragon. I think that's the one that had the most impact on me, and I think just because our jobs are so tied with people, and people come with baggage, right? There's a lot going on in people's lives, and we don't always know the details. And sometimes it's not, we may never know. It's not our place necessarily to know the details. And sometimes people want to talk about it. And if it's appropriate, you can talk about it and dive into it with them. I feel fortunate that that's a part of my job because I love the people part of it. In terms of lessons, I would say that would be the one, is just sort of giving people the benefit of the doubt, and just trying to just um, just doing what you can to support people, right? You never know what's going on in someone's life, and you never know when that thing that you might say to try to encourage them, that positive feedback that you can say. It's easy to give feedback when something needs to change, right? If something's not going well, say, you know what, we need to sit down and we need to talk about this. And, you can dive into, you're not doing X, you're not doing Y, you're not doing Z. But I would almost say it's harder to remember to give the positive feedback when things are going well. And I think that's the feedback that means the most, because it's like fuel in people's tank, right? Like the guy that I was talking about earlier, that's kind of the way he had described it to me. He ended up becoming a somewhat of a mentor of mine, and I'm so grateful for learning from him. But he was talking about that almost as, not that relationships are purely transactional. So I don't want what I'm about to say to kind of boil down into that. But in some ways, he was talking about how, like, when you do give that positive feedback, when you are encouraging, you're depositing a coin in that bank. So that when that time comes with that artist or whatever it is that you have to sit down and you have to give that negative feedback, if you've put 10 coins in that bank, you're only pulling one out, two out. You're still in you're still in the net positive, right? And just speaking sort of relationship wise, hopefully it can survive that. And hopefully they almost hear that feedback better because that you've given that positive feedback along the way. They respect you as a person, and they know this person is not out to get me. Whereas if the first time they hear from you is negative feedback and you need to fix this, that's hard, right? They start to think, well, this guy doesn't believe in me. This guy, he's out to get me. He doesn't know me, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, hopefully that makes sense. But just again, I think that goes back to, I had mentioned authenticity earlier. I think that's a part of it too, right? Like, I think if you, as a production person, if you genuinely care about your job and the people that you're working for, that's going to come through, and that's hopefully not going to be that hard.
Definitely, thank you. What are your future aspirations in in production or in the animation industry in general?
Yeah, thank you for asking that one. I would love to produce. I feel like I'm on that path. I've talked to my producer at Netflix about it. I've expressed that that's what I want to do. I whether it's producing, at a place like Netflix or DreamWorks or Disney, or producing an independent, short or feature, I've daydreamed with my friends about it. Yeah, I'd love to produce animation.
Can I ask what that entails, like being a producer, like in feature animation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, there's a couple ways to look at it. There's often a producer and then a line producer. The line producer is generally the person that's more in the weeds in the finances and in the schedule. The producer, sometimes people just call it the creative producer. I don't like that term specifically because I think there's creativity in a lot of what we do, across the board, including in line producing. But anyways, there's sort of the top of the pyramid producer. So it's sort of in production, like as as you move up the ranks, and the different studios have different structures, but if you think PA, coordinator, production supervisor, production manager, associate producer or line producer, producer, it's almost like your sort of their purview, like what you're responsible for just opens up and gets bigger and bigger. Kind of like the example I gave where, I was department manager at Weta, where I was looking across multiple shows versus a supervisor, production supervisor might just be focused on getting one show through. But I'm going to push that aside because that's not about feature animation. That's maybe not helpful. But I guess the same thing goes with feature animation, right? So as production manager, I'm looking across on my current project, right? I'm looking across story, editorial, and art. And eventually I'll be responsible for the shot production as well, but that'll go to a partner studio that I'll be working with. And so rather than being focused on, as a production supervisor, art specifically and moving art through the pipeline and getting, receiving, from story edit and, that sort of thing, I'm like a step up, kind of looking across. And then I think a step up from that, is similar in that, like, they're looking at the bigger picture, and oftentimes you're much more involved in story editorial with directors. Sometimes, and it depends on the structure, right? Sometimes, if you brought an original idea, maybe you're more involved in the creative than others. If you're sort of more of a producer for hire at DreamWorks or Netflix or that sort of thing, you're involved, but you're not necessarily developing it in the way that you would if it was like your own property or that sort of thing. So there's not like a super clear answer, but it's definitely, I would say, more responsibility and sort of more bigger picture. You're going to be responsible, like, with talking to casting, who's landing in what roles, involved with like music, all of the details that go into the production, the managing the post-production schedule. Like, it's just sort of bigger picture. Just think, as you go up, you're getting a bigger picture of the production itself.
I see. Cool. Thank you. Maribel asks, with the exposure that you had with the marketing team during your time at DreamWorks at DreamWorks for Trolls World Tour, can you elaborate more about the department? Is marketing more focused on traditional business, or does it also have other layers such as graphic design positions, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you're at in marketing. Specifically, the work that I was doing, I think the reason I think that they, in the conversations before I took the job, said you can do this, was that my role in specific was sort of representing the show to the marketing teams and vice versa. So I would go, I would have a meeting at Universal, actually multiple meetings at Universal and then at DreamWorks. And that was sort of like, they would outline, and this depends on where you're at, because you might be in different parts of this process. But for speaking of that experience and me specifically, I would go to these meetings and they would sort of outline their needs, whether it's trailer content, what their plan was to market the film. And I could speak to what that meant for the production, right? I was sort of embedded inversely with the production itself, and I knew where they were. I could speak to their pipeline. I could speak to where they, maybe they're asking for a shot and a sequence that's not out of lighting yet. So you're not going to get that shot, or I could go talk to the production manager and say, hey, they want this shot. It's scheduled to finish in 2 weeks. Can we shift things around and move it up a little bit to try to make this trailer deadline? And so it was basically like I was sort of translate, and vice versa. I guess that's the vice versa. Like, I would take the requests and the needs and the desires from the marketing end, and I take it back to the production and sort of represent it. So it's almost a representative on both ends for that process, and sort of making sure that marketing wasn't going too far down a road on something that just wasn't even like feasible, right? Like, if they were basing a specific part of the campaign on something that's not going to be done in production in until like 3 months down the road, like, they need to know that as soon as possible. And so, like, I'm in that role. My job was to keep those lines of communication going and making sure no one was like getting too far off.
I see. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it was cool. And again, it's an area that like I said, normally I'm embedded in the productions itself, and so I would get those requests sometimes from marketing, and it would be frustrating, right? Like, what do you
Mhm.
mean you want this? But like getting it from the inverse, right? Like, and seeing the machine that's happening on the other side, I think it made me. I mean, it makes me a better production person, right? And hopefully a better producer because I have some insight into where that's coming from.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Jerry asks, I love that you reminded us that sometimes you have to be the one to relay confusion and like the I don't knows are totally okay. And this is an openness that can ultimately create connections. Could you share any particular experiences revolving the this that comes to mind, if any? Much appreciation from a fellow kid from Kern County. Thank you.
Oh, nice. Oh man, I probably should have anticipated this one. Um, I can't think of like the specifics of it. I know that it happened a few times at DreamWorks. I know there was a few times where there was a decision sort of made from on high, um, whether it's something shifting around. Man, I'm struggling to find details. Um, but how did I handle it? I think I kind of walk through it. I think it really comes down to um, it I will say it doesn't feel great to be in that position, right? Like it doesn't, to be the one to have to impart information that you don't fully understand, and maybe you don't even fully believe it, like in the decision, the reason for the decision itself. Or maybe you do know the decision, you're told you can't talk about the reason why, and you have to talk to the team about it. Those are not great positions to be in. It can be frustrating, it's daunting. um, and I think if up until that point, kind of like I was talking about earlier, if you've been authentic, there's almost a level of trust that you've built in with the crew, where you can actually say, I can't talk about this, I wish I could, but I'm just not allowed to talk about the specifics right now. And hopefully down the road we can have another conversation about this when I am able to talk about it. And sometimes that might be enough for one artist, that might not be enough, and you have to take it from there, and you're thinking on your toes. And I think if you maintain that level of vulnerability and authenticity, um, I think you'll find a path through it, whatever the situation is. Like it's sometimes it's really hard, and I care, right? Like I care about the crew, and so it's hard sometimes to not be able to talk in more detail or give them the answers that they want, or even you feel like they deserve. Like if you're told explicitly like you can't talk about this, that's hard. But yeah.
It's just like a situation to situation basis.
Yeah, it really is.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, uh, do you have any tips or advice for interviews, and conversely, like also for people looking to join as like a production assistant?
Yes, that's a great question. I would go back to the authenticity part of it. There's lots of tips and tricks out there, and I'm going to be guilty of it saying right now, because they're asking for some tips and tricks. Some of it may apply to you, and some of it may not. And I think look at it. If it doesn't feel true to you or your nature, set it aside. But just in general, tips and tricks: come prepared. Um, do your research, right? Nowadays with social media, with LinkedIn, you can find out a little bit more about the people that you're going to be interviewing with. Hopefully they've told you in advance who it is. Find out about their career paths, where they've been, what they've done. Make sure you understand the role itself. Read through the job details. Come prepared with questions that relate to the job itself, and maybe the people that you're working with. I mean, you don't want to like ask a creeper question that about something personal that you read on their Facebook or something. But, if it's relevant, you can say, oh, hey, I saw you worked at DreamWorks, in the past, when were you there? What projects just something like that. But yeah, I think be on time for the interviews. Like it's like I said earlier, our days are busy, and it's not a good look if you're sitting in a room waiting for this person to show up. Yeah, I think any of the kind of stuff that we had talked about in sort of the tips and tricks that I shared a little earlier, and they're not tricks, but just sort of the stuff, like any of that you can model or demonstrate. I think emphasizing, like, you're all animation students, right? I think it's great. And I'm so grateful for the education I got at Cal State Fullerton, because I can speak with experience to the work, not just of production, but to animation itself. And so, emphasize that. As a PA, the thing is, the hard part about that sort of that first entry level job, especially if you're coming with no experience, there's so many people applying for those jobs. It helps to know people that can help, put your interview, like, hey, maybe it's a fellow student that's already got their foot in the door and they know that you work hard, and that you would be a good fit for it. Maybe they can reach out to the recruiter, and that sort of thing. It's hard to land those first jobs. But I will say, both with the recommendations that you give and both the recommendations that you get, those are extremely valuable things. I would just say that I'm very careful when people ask for me to recommend them, and it's a hard place to be in, because when I do that, I'm putting my reputation on the line, and I'm saying, I think this person can do this, and I believe them, and I think if you hire them, it's going to work out. That's not always the case, right? And you don't have control over everything. But I guess what I'm getting at is, don't feel peer pressured into recommending someone that you're not comfortable with, because you are putting your reputation on the line by doing that. And there's value that goes with that. And if you've worked hard in your job, it carries weight. And so anytime that you do that, make sure that you're doing it with confidence, and then you have to let it go, because that person is getting the job, not you, and that person is an individual person who's going to make their own decisions. And so at a certain point, you have to, like, kind of hope for the best, but in my experience, it's always worked out for the positive. My friend Jack helped me get that job at Zoic. I've had really close friends, my friend Frankie that I'd mentioned at the beginning there, who's a board artist now. I helped him get an interview at DreamWorks, and he came in as a PA. And so, it's those sort of things that, like, it's real. And I see him typing in the chat. It carries weight, and so do it for the people that you feel like are gonna take it and run with it and excel with it. And conversely, I think the other side of that is, if someone's sticking their neck out for you, make it worth their while, because they are putting their reputation on the line, and you have the opportunity to add to that reputation if you can excel and if you can put your best foot forward and do really well in that job.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I'm also writing notes.
It's okay.
All right. Angie asks, I arrived late to the presentation, so I apologize if you already answered this. What year did you graduate at Cal State Fullerton? Also, would you encourage more people to travel to another country if it means that they would work in the job they have always wanted, similar to how you went to New Zealand?
Yes. So I graduated in 2005. Yeah. And then to answer the other question, I would say absolutely. Both getting out of California and going to Seattle, and then going from Seattle to Wellington, I think it broadens your horizons in a way that's hard to explain if you haven't done it yourself. It's easy to, I don't think people do it on purpose, but it's easy to find yourself in a bubble, right? And I think it's easier to have more empathy with people when you've seen more people, and you've experienced life with other people that you're unfamiliar with, or maybe, New Zealanders don't make me uncomfortable, but I'm just saying, like, get out of your comfort zone. Those are hard decisions to make. Like choosing to move my family halfway around the world was a big step to take, but I don't regret it for a second. And I've seen the benefits it has, both for myself and my career and me as a person, but even my kids, right? Just having them see another part of the world, see a system of a society that's maybe not, New Zealand's not a third world country, but it's also not structured the same way as the United States is. And they're different people with different customs, a different form of government. And to see a healthy society like that, where I go back to, I was California born and raised, and in the United States, you're sort of taught like, America is, this shining light and the only way to do things and all this stuff, and it's great, like be patriotic and all that stuff. But the truth is, it's not the only way to do things. And there's people doing it around the world that are just as successful, if not more successful. And it's great to go see that and be a part of it and see beyond your current circumstances, even if it's just for a spell. And I would go back to my wife's other question about going back. It kind of gives you this like sense of being a world citizen, and I love it. I'd love to live in New Zealand again another day, and maybe even somewhere else. Maybe we'll go to Europe.
Oof. I love the idea of just traveling, but the idea of like moving to another country sounds like, it sounds like wonderful, just wonderful in general.
It really is. I'm extremely grateful for that experience. And I was working on some incredible projects at the same time. Like it was like, you couldn't, don't get me wrong, it was hard, and it was hard work, and I was working really hard when I was there, but we did day trips around the country. That holiday break that we had that year, we did a road trip around the South Island, and we were just talking earlier today about some of those memories from that trip. Like, they'll always be with our family, and it's great. It makes you, I genuinely think it makes you a better person. And I'm just not talking about New Zealand in specific, but just getting out, if you can, right? It's not within everyone's ability sometimes, but if you have that opportunity, I would say take it.
Cool. Thank you so much. Okay. Frankie has two questions. I'm going to ask both of them.
No.
One of them is, would you ever consider moving to Vancouver? And the other one is, how has your training and education in animation transferred to your career in production? Would you change anything about your time /involvement /training /classes, etc., while you were at CSUF in hindsight?
Oh man, Frankie. The first answer to the first question is yes. I would love to. I actually considered it when I was in New Zealand, and I was looking for jobs back, I would say in North America. I was looking in LA, but my friend, actually, Jen, that I'd mentioned, that she's in our picture, that graduation picture, she was in Vancouver, and I talked to her about working up there, and we considered it. And there's a lot of things to weigh when you're talking about jobs, and I'm not an island myself. I'm a part of a family, and so there's other considerations to make when you're talking about those things. And my wife is my partner, and I want to make sure we're on the same page, and we talk things through, and we make those decisions together. That's a little bit of a detour, but the short answer is yes, I would consider working in Vancouver if the job was right and it was right for our family. And then the other part of his question is about my education, how it is applied to, I'm trying to think back to the question so I can answer it, but would I do anything differently? I would say no. That's a hard one to answer, because you never, like, it's that path, right? If you do something differently, do you end up in the same place? Like I have regrets, right? There are things that I wish I'd focused more on when I was in school. There are places where I wish I had worked harder and applied myself more. But on the whole, would I change things? I don't know. Like I have a wife I love. I have 4 kids I love. I love, Frankie, my friends, the job that I'm in. Like, would that all be the same? I don't know. So, but as far as like the things that I learned and how they've applied, I would say the only thing I wish maybe that the only thing I would add, I guess, to the education would be if there was just maybe a course or a little more sort of insight into production management. I mean, we talked about it in the sense, I think one of our classes, we had to like produce a short, and we kind of were told to like make a schedule. And it was just really kind of like, I don't fault anybody for it, but it was just like it was just the kind of the thing that you had to do to kind of get through, but it wasn't talked about in depth. It wasn't like, we didn't talk about the details. We didn't talk about how it relates to actual feature animation production, not just students making a short and organizing ourselves and that sort of thing. So yeah, I do wish that they had that more, but as far as the education that I did get, I think it actually makes me a better production person. Both that and at Animation Mentor, as I was pursuing layout, I think it because I understand at a deeper level, you know, what's happening. One of the things I didn't mention in there is like, I truly believe, and every department's going to say this, right? But I truly believe that production is sort of the beating heart of a production, right? Because, and production, people in production management, I think people see it as sort of the, you know, oh, you can get in as a PA, so anybody can do it. And sure, like a lot of people can get in as a PA, but I don't think that you can, I don't think that applies as you move upward and as you grow in the career. And what I guess what I mean by that is, totally lost my train of thought. What I'm getting at though is that when you're in production, not everyone has, you can learn some of the skills, right? But there's an aptitude for it that you can't teach. And hopefully you can maybe grow that and you can develop that if you work at it. But it's not that, I think there, it gets this reputation for not being super important. And I see it as the opposite. Like people in production actually have to understand the whole pipeline, right? Because part of our job is moving the show along, moving the content in and out of the departments. What are the dependencies? You know, who are you shipping to? At a level that I think people in the individual departments don't necessarily need to know or know themselves. You could be working in art or story on one job, and in the next job you're working in lighting, and those are two completely different departments. The personalities in those departments are completely different, and you have to adapt yourself to them. And I think it's a testament to people who excel in production that they can do that, because you're, and I guess going back to Frankie's question, I feel like I'm monologuing. I feel like yes, I think my education has helped me with that. And it helps me understand at a deeper level what's happening in those departments. So it's not just I'm understanding the terms and moving things around. Sometimes that's the case, and sometimes I don't understand things, and I try to stay curious and dive in and get to the details, and that's okay as long as you're trying to do those things. But yeah, I do think the short answer is I think it's really helped me be a better production person. There you go, Frankie.
Thank you. We have one more question from Oprier Harrison. Thank you for taking the time to present for us. What do you think it would take for studios outside of California to become more well known?
Ooh, I would say that is an interesting question. I would say we're almost on a path there if we're not there already, given the current state of the industry. Excuse me. So much work. A lot of people sometimes. Sorry. It's referred to like the illumination model. I think, you know. Excuse me. I just drank all this water. The illumination, so DreamWorks, Disney, Pixar, they kind of do all their stuff in-house, right? And that was the de facto model for feature animation. And Illumination came along, right? And they sent their work over to France. They ended up buying that facility, but that sort of do the pre and post-production here, ship the production overseas. I think that really sort of popularized that, and it's becoming more and more common. It's the model that Netflix Animation uses. And I think as that happens, a lot of these partner studios, like some people call them vendor studios, they're going to get their own reputations, and they're going to be more and more well known, and they're going to become more and more sort of top shelf and desirable by these studios as they're looking to partner with international studios, or maybe, you know, even studios in Vancouver and these other places. And so I think we're on our way there. I think given that sort of emerging model as a primary production, Disney's always going to do their stuff. I shouldn't say always. I think Disney's going to always have, at least in some shape or size, they're going to do stuff in-house, right? But I think they're going to also start doing other productions where they ship stuff overseas. They do it in their TV unit. Pixar's always going to have Pixar. They're going to do their stuff in there, but I think you're going to see more and more studios like Netflix and like that are going to be, and that's why you get, I mean, I can't know if I can talk about a lot of the details, but like the amount of content that Netflix is producing right now is unreal. And I think the current the state of the industry allows for it, which is incredible. Like to go from where we're at now to like where I was kind of talking about when I was in college and the industry was shaky and people were like, is animation going to survive? And, it's pretty incredible to see how it's adapted itself. And even given the current state of the world, right, with the pandemic, this is one of the forms of production that can continue. You don't have to be on set. I took this job with Netflix. I've not, other than the people that I worked with at DreamWorks that are now I'm working with, I've never met these people in person. I interviewed over Zoom. I got the job. I started. I've never been in a room with these people. My producer, who I've worked with for a few months now, I feel incredibly close with. I've never shaken her hand. It's just like things are evolving, and it's interesting. I think you just kind of have to stay aware, stay plugged in, and evolve with it, hopefully.
Well, thank you so much. I believe that's all the time that we have for today. So I just want to give a big thank you to you, Shane, for coming to speak for us. And I feel like I've learned so much just from like this presentation alone. And I'm super excited to, break into the industry in production.
That's great. No, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's good to. Thank you for showing up. I know time is valuable, and the fact that you all came and are listening and participating, it means a lot to me. And so thank you for that. And good luck out there. Good luck with graduation. I wish you guys all the best, and hopefully we'll cross paths. And someday, you see me in a studio and you'd be like, hey, I saw, I was a student and I saw your webinar. Like, please come up to me if that's the case.
Yeah, definitely
right.
will. I hope that we are able to meet sometime in person, so I can thank you properly for coming.
Of course. No, thank you.
And
Did you have a question? Yeah.
Thank you too. Just thank you for being so honest and like open and real with us. I just like that was the biggest takeaway from this, and just that reminder that we're all people here on this earth, so thank you so much for that. And I just got so much incredible, insightful advice from this.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Of course.
All right.
Yeah, thank you guys again for coming. Good luck to everybody who has finals right now, and stay safe, stay healthy, have a good holiday.
Yes, happy holidays. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. All right, bye.